Welcome to this episode of Mentors at Your Benchside, the podcast giving you advice, tips, and tools for getting the most out of your research. I'm Laura Grassi, and today I'll be talking to you about my top 10 tips for not only surviving, but acing your Viva. The Viva Voce, meaning expressed or conducted by means of speech, is the final hurdle in becoming a doctor, of philosophy, of course. And it is also the most feared part of completing a PhD, fueled by horror stories of evil examiners and 8-hour-long exams. I drove myself crazy by reading stories of failed Vivas on the internet and convinced myself of my impending doom. But having what I can only describe as a relatively pleasant experience, I want to let people know that Vivas aren't always a hellish experience, and as well as sharing my tips for Viva success. I should start off by mentioning that my PhD wasn't smooth sailing. Lots of things went wrong and I had many months of negative results. Because of this, I'd convinced myself I was going to fail. However, I ended up rather enjoying my Viva, and I'm sure it is in no small part due to some great advice that I received. I want to pass this advice on, so here are my top tips for getting through and maybe even enjoying your Viva. Tip number 1, calm down and breathe. Working yourself up is only going to make things worse by stopping you sleeping and making you ill. Find a way to relax, be it yoga, running, meditation, or even video games. Just find something to help you stay calm during those long weeks and even months leading up to your Viva. Tip number 2, do something fun. That time between submitting your thesis and the day of your defense is a strange limbo time. It's easy to get caught up and feel like you should be constantly revising. My advice is don't. You still need to have fun or you'll wear yourself down before the exam. You want to be fresh on the day, so go out and have some fun. Maybe with those friends you've neglected over the last months and years. Tip number 3, believe in yourself. I know it's easy to have little faith in your own abilities, especially if your PhD has not been all publications and rainbows. But don't forget, you have spent the last few years reading about it, writing about it, and doing your project. You are the expert. You know your stuff. Remember that. Tip number 4, go in with a good attitude. Don't see the examiners as evil torturers who get kicks out of making you suffer. They want you to pass. However, if you go in thinking that they want you to fail, you'll not only be more scared, you'll also be more defensive, which isn't always a good thing. Instead, try to think of your examiners as people who are really interested in what you have done and who understand all the problems and pitfalls associated with research. Tip number 5, dress for Viva success. Years of lab work may have your wardrobe looking a little worse for wear, and your idea of smart as wearing a t-shirt without any stains or holes, but you should try to make a proper effort to dress smart on your Viva day. Firstly, looking good will help your self-esteem, making you feel more confident. Secondly, it shows the examining committee that you are serious about your PhD and the Viva, which of course you are, and you want them to know that too. Tip number 6, read your thesis. While you've spent the last several years doing your research and the last however long writing it up, you want to make sure that it's fresh in your mind. This is especially true if you've had a long gap between submitting your thesis and the exam. You don't have to, and probably shouldn't, read it once a day, every day until your Viva. Just make sure you go over it a few times before the exam. Tip number 7, know the rules. Every institution is different. For some, you have just 2 examiners. Others, you also have a convener. In some institutions, you might need to prepare a talk to present before the Viva. This was the case for me, and I found it a great preparation for the exam. If you want tips on creating a perfect presentation, you should check out our article, Top Tips for Giving Great Talks, which will be linked in the episode description. You need to make sure you know what your institution does so that you are well prepared. One important thing to find out is if you are allowed to bring a copy of your thesis into the exam, and if so, whether or not you can annotate it. Tip number 8, make a list of your own corrections. Unless you are perfect or had your thesis professionally proofread, your thesis is likely to contain many mistakes. After reading it over so many times, you often see what you think should be written instead of what actually is. Before your exam, take another look over your thesis, preferably after some time away so you're more fresh. Find all the mistakes, write them down, and take them into the exam. I won't deny this is going to be painful, and you'll be cursing yourself for not catching these mistakes earlier. However, the examiners will be impressed that you did it, and you'll be less fazed by mistakes they highlight. Plus, you could save yourself some time and correct them before the Viva, meaning less time spent on corrections afterwards. Tip number 9, make plans to celebrate your Viva success. Or get a friend to organise something if you're too busy or nervous. I was so scared of failing, I didn't want to organise anything. But when it was over and I'd passed, I was so glad to have a night out organised by my friends, especially after so many Saturday nights doing lab work or writing. Tip number 10, try to enjoy it. I know it may seem absurd, but this is the moment all the blood, sweat, and tears has been leading up to. Enjoy your moment in the spotlight. I was surprised to find that I really enjoyed my Viva. I was finally able to get it all off my chest. All the big flaws that I was convinced my examiners would point out were barely touched on. And I got to discuss my thoughts and theories with people who were interested and gave me new perspectives and ideas. So that's my advice, and I hope it helps you if you are preparing to defend your thesis. Check out the episode description for links to related articles and resources. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast to get more help and advice from mentors at your benchside.